Peter, I believe, and James and John had a vision. And here's why I think that. Second thing I read this week was an article by Clark Strand, who is this interesting sort of fellow who one of his latest books is actually How to Believe in God Without Believing in Religion, or Whether or Not You Believe in Religion. And he also was at one point a Zen priest, and then he wrote a book that said How to Meditate Without a Guru, and so he tends to be one of those people that looks to slip away from systems that confine him. And he does a Bible study now, I believe in Pennsylvania, that centers around some of the same things we look at. What does it mean to believe in God if you're free from religious institutions? And he learned about a study that's been done regarding human beings and our natural rhythms, and people who, for the purposes of this study, laid down in bed when it was dark, oddly enough. And they would, when it became dusk, they would start to get ready for bed, and then they would lay in bed. And of course, as we know in this part of the country, there are those days when we actually leave for work and come home again, and it's dark both times. And if you work in a place without mirrors, you never see the light. But these people, for the purposes of the study, were sent away somewhere. And they found that for the first 4 weeks, where they were laying down for as much as 14 hours, they slept through the whole thing. And gradually, after 4 weeks, they returned to where they were only sleeping 8 hours a night, which indicates we have a pretty severe sleep deficit, which is no news to anybody. And then when they get back to the 8-hour thing, universally that happened in 2 4-hour segments. And so what happened before they first fell asleep, in the middle when they awoke, and at the end, was they remained in bed and were in a place that was sometimes dreamlike, sometimes being awake, and the way I can best describe it is if you've ever had a dream that you're doing things, that you're awake and doing things, and you wake up and you think, I haven't been asleep at all, and you notice 4 hours have gone by, and so you know you haven't been awake anymore. And they started to get more in touch with, for lack of a better description, their spiritual selves in these periods of rest but not sleep. And it occurs to me that the people in Jesus' time, of course, not having electricity, not even natural gas lamps, were very much too determined, and their level of activity was determined by the seasons. And so there were times, no doubt, when they were inactive for longer periods of time. And so no doubt, some of the things that they experienced, it seems pretty incredible to us. And even some of the things that monastics experience through medieval times, and even currently, assuming that they're getting adequate rest, maybe some of those things that seem pretty wild aren't all that wild at all. Maybe these visions are ways to get in touch with our spiritual selves that naturally occur if only we're well rested. Maybe if we got less frenetic about our activity and just spend more time being, these things would once again be everyday to us. And I recognize that poses a whole lot of problems in terms of making a living, particularly in winter and northern climates. But what it does for me is it points up the truth that you can look at some biblical scholars do on this story as having been constructed to do what Paul's doing in his letter. Show Jesus as the natural progression in faith from Moses, who after all led the Jewish people out of exile, to Elijah, the great prophet, and Jesus is the next one in the line. It could be that, but that's a pretty cynical view. It could be that for Peter, James, and John, and eventually all of the disciples, at some point in their journey, this waffling that went on through most of the Gospels ended, and the light bulb went off, and they said, holy cow, I get it now. Obviously, Peter doesn't get it in the context of the Transfiguration because they're all up there, and Peter, celebrating the Jewish festival of Tabernacles, wants to make a tabernacle for him. But at some point later, the bulb must have went off. At some point later, this accumulation of experiences that he and the others had must have locked into place and made sense. And it has been suggested that for the disciples, for the apostles in particular, who all scattered at the crucifixion, when it all locked into place was after that. When they returned to their homes, when they returned to the daily rhythms and the fishing that they did and the normal lifestyle, that all of a sudden the frenetic activity of 3 years slowed down and it all starts to make sense. And so, as we stand on the edge of Lent, Wednesday being Ash Wednesday, maybe rather than Lent being an opportunity this year for us to deny ourselves of something, maybe we should free ourselves from something. Free ourselves from at least some of the endless activity that we're engaged in. Give ourselves some time to sit in the silence as we journey with Jesus through the Lenten season to his arrest, crucifixion, death, and resurrection. And just give things an opportunity to click into place. Just see if the time spent in a little bit of silence and a little less activity doesn't make a whole lot of our lives fall into place. And if we're loyal to that, we may just find that that's something we want to continue, even beyond the Lent and the Easter seasons. We may just find that in those silent times, in those times of less activity, we too find ourselves on a mountaintop now and again, seeing things that we maybe can't quite explain, but that we know in our heart of hearts are true, and look at God and Jesus and the world around us in a whole new way. It's a way we can experience resurrection again and again throughout our lives, and prepare ourselves for that moment when we are resurrected and discover what really comes next.